Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennfier Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. Episode 71 of The Human Experience is Markella's story. Markella is from Athens, but she spent her childhood traveling with her parents who worked for the Greek embassy, landing in places such as Chicago and Saudi Arabia. Her adolescence was marked by the experiences she had living in different parts of the world, lending her a unique perspective. But it was after becoming a mother that Markella found a true and passionate calling. After having her child, she realized how much she had changed and how natural and necessary that change was to the current season of her life. It was with this in mind that she formed her business, where she helps mothers, fathers, and couples navigate the changes that parenthood brings. This episode was recorded in Athens, Greece.
So we are in Athens, in this right by the Acropolis, actually, but even though you can't see it you can see it from the roof. The guy took me up to the roof to show me where everything was in, like, yeah, you can go that way to the Acropolis, that way to the Acropolis Museum. So this is my first time in Athens, but you are from Athens originally, correct?
Yes. I haven't lived here my entire life, but I was born here. I am Greek. But I have moved around about every 3 years of my life until I hit adulthood.
Wow.
So on one hand, Athens feels like home. And on another hand, it feels like sometimes I'm also a little bit of a tourist. I get really excited about things I haven't seen. And today, honestly, it's nice to be here because I live a little further up south. And so I don't get the opportunity ever since I had my son as easily to come downtown. And I do love being around this area a lot.
That's awesome. I love to hear that because it's totally different for me. I'm from Philadelphia, but as far as America goes, it's pretty much where the history is, like in the Northeast. And so, I feel the same way where I still think like those historical things are cool and like I want to see them, and I'm not like, ugh, yeah, again, like Independence Hall, whatever. and not that I go all of the time or anything, but I love to hear that you still find magic in the place that you're from. It hasn't lost anything for you because you've lived here, for so long. So yeah, what is that like to actually grow up in a ancient historical place? I mean, you have so much around you. I'm personally very jealous of you in that way. But yeah, what is that like? Because do you as a kid get to go with your school to like visit places and visit historical sites? Because like we did field trips like that as a kid. But again, in America, we're talking like 200 years, not thousands.
Yeah. It's nice. Yes, you do when you're in elementary school and middle school and more than that. You do get to go to trips and you do get to see all these things. And as an adult as well, I think that a lot of Greeks have it in them to want to come and see and visit places. It's been steadily growing here in Greece that we have more museums and there's more. The cultural heritage wasn't as preserved or not as preserved. It was always preserved, but it wasn't as demonstrated. We didn't have nice places, attractive places, nicely kept places where you could go see all these things, not as we do now. And so it's becoming even more of a thing, I guess. But it's always been very important in schools, definitely. And so as a kid, you do grow up seeing these things. Honestly, as a kid, I was here 4th and 5th grade. And then like my senior year,
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I got to experience very little of it, but I did have cousins and friends that would tell me and show me what they got to see. And to be very frank, I think if you were born here, I don't know if you would appreciate it as much as you do as a foreigner, and as much as I do as a person who didn't get to see this every day, who didn't get to be here every day. I wouldn't be around the Acropolis per se every day.
Yeah.
However, when you're here, you don't really appreciate it as much. And there's something about Greeks. I don't know. I've lived in the US, but I don't know if other cultures have this, but Greeks have this a lot where we really appreciate other countries, especially the US. We look up to it. Some people, some people don't. We've
Disclaimer.
This disclaimer. We've got the other half that's not very US friendly. But even that half that's not very US friendly, deep inside there's this thing where we kind of look to other countries, usually more economically stable than ours, and we always think that Germany or the US or Switzerland or whoever, they are better, they're more civilized, they do more things, they have better benefits for their citizens. And we don't realize that it can't be the way that we're fantasizing about it. It's an outlet, in my opinion.
Sure.
But there's a part of me that's always a little bit sad when I hear comments like this, because I've lived abroad and I see that every country has its positives, it has its negatives.
Yes.
And we don't appreciate Greece enough as Greeks a lot of times.
Yeah. And I do think that on some level, that's a universal experience, right? In that the grass is always greener. And so again, like, I can't speak to Greek heritage or Greek culture, but in America, there's a lot of idealizing of specifically Europe, not specific countries in Europe, just Europe as a continent. And again, it's not everybody, but there are people that idealize it to a degree that, everything there is perfect and everything in the United States is bad. And like you said, no place is perfect. There are pros and cons everywhere. And yeah, you can't escape that. But I think it is beautiful to be able to recognize your current place, like the value of your current place. And I do think that travel and living in multiple places does kind of lend you a certain vein of, I don't know, just it lends you an air of gratitude. Right?
That's the word I would go for. Yeah. Gratitude, recognition.
Yeah.
And it's different to travel and it's different to actually get to live there.
100%.
Or like a friend that I have who travels and she goes to a place for minimum a month and she never stays in a hotel or even an Airbnb. She actually stays with people. Couch surfing, is it called?
Wow.
And so what she does is she immerses herself in the culture. I don't know that a month is enough necessarily, but it's completely different from a person like me who would go to a different country and stay for a week.
Yeah.
So the fact that I got to live in places for 3 years at a time, I got to see things from the inside. I got to be in the school system. I got to be in general in the everyday life, to see the people, to meet the people, to befriend the people there, and to see the positives and to see the negatives. And I think this does gift me the appreciation for Greece, but also for other countries as well, for the things that I got to see there.
Yeah. Yeah. Which then let's get into it, because you were born here, but your parents are they both immigrants to Greece?
No. My parents are Greek. However, they were born in Lebanon.
Okay.
So their parents were immigrants to Lebanon.
Oh, interesting.
So there was a war here and they fled to Lebanon and my parents were born there.
Okay. And did they both grow up there?
Yes, up until they were 18, where they came back here to study.
Wow.
And they stayed.
And did they meet in Greece or?
No, they were schoolmates in Lebanon.
That's so cute.
I think it was a Greek-Lebanese school.
Okay. So they grew up together and that's really
sweet. They ended up together.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love that. So they obviously have a completely different perspective than Greek people that were
Greek.
just born and stayed here their entire lives. So, and then you moved around as well. So what was that like for you to kind of have, I mean, our parents inform so much of our perspectives when we're children. So what was that like for you to have parents that weren't just from one part in Greece and, you know, just had that life experience, but had such a wider view?
As a child, I don't know that I recognized it so much that it was very clear to me. For me, a lot of things seem normal. A funny story, now that you say this, I was working for a family that is from the Middle East. And I was there with them for a while. And as I was there in their house, I realized that they did certain things that we do as a family. But when I came, like my parents came back when I was back to Greece when I was 16, right? And I was in an international school at that point because going into Greek school wasn't very easy for me. There were certain lessons and things that I hadn't done, like ancient Greek and Latin, and I couldn't catch up.
Yeah.
So we were, with my sister, we were put into international school. And so I was hanging out pretty much mostly with an American friend at the time. And it was more of an international setting. But as I graduated and as I started integrating more and more back into my own culture, I started realizing that there are things that we do as a family that other Greek families, none of them do. And I was like, why though? This is so practical, or why? And that answer was never given. And then I get with my now husband, then boyfriend, and he was like, you know, how come you do this? Like, and I'm like, how come you don't?
Yeah. Get with it.
And then I go and I work for this family, and they're doing the same things. And I'm like, oh. So I realized at like 20 something, 30 something, I realized that, oh my God, I've been living a life where I didn't realize that it was mixed culture that I was being raised in. Because in my mind, they were born in Lebanon, but they weren't Lebanese. And for some weird reason, it hadn't registered that they grew up there their entire lives. And even though their parents came from Greece, they probably assimilated certain things, and the practical things that I'm talking about, they decided to take on. And so it hit me like very late that, yes, you grew up in a home that was, in a sense, multicultural, because they got to see things. And there was one of my grandmothers had grown up in a place that was at some point taken by the Turks. And so there have been influences from there. And so it was like this whole thing. And I think at some point, my mother's father and grandmother, they had fled to Russia. There's like this whole thing. And so I hadn't realized the depth of what was going on until I was way older. As a child, I don't think I appreciated it. I actually really disliked the fact that we had to be moving around. And I didn't take the time to realize the richness in everything.
Yeah. I think that's such a fantastic and interesting point of view for multiple reasons, but one of which that's striking me right now is, again, as an American, we're very unfamiliar with the necessity of leaving our home, right? Like, people can choose to do that. And moving states is, you're still in the same country. But there are a lot of places in the world that people don't have a choice. And so, you know, talking about your family history and, you know, having to leave Greece and there being war and there being conflict that necessitates the move. I just think, you know, it affects generations, right? Like, we don't necessarily like to think about it affecting multiple generations down the line. Like, oh, that happened to that person, that was horrible, whatever. But life goes on. But that person's view And everything that they pass down to their descendants is colored by that experience. So, I do think it's a really valuable thing to talk about and a valuable experience to have even multiple generations down the line.
Definitely. What you're talking about is generational trauma, and it does get passed down. And some people will think it's woo-woo because they're thinking that we're talking about energy being passed down from here to there. First of all, there are researchers talking about it being passed down through the genes themselves. But even if we take it from a completely behavioral point of view, which is not what I abide with, I don't go with the strictly behavioral cognitive thing anymore. But even if we do take it from that perspective, the fact that, for example, let's assume I am my grandmother and I've been through war and I've been scared for my family and I had to flee in order to protect my children or in order to be protected. And then I had children in a different place and I don't know the language. All of these things create uncertainty at the very least. They create fear. And so this will definitely color the way that she is going to treat her children.
Yes.
It might cause her trauma. And we're talking about generations before. Nobody's dealing with it. Nobody's talking about it. Even to this day, we have this attitude of get with it, power through.
Yeah.
But back then it was the norm. And so she doesn't have time to deal with it. She's in survival mode.
Yes.
And she's trying to protect her children. And when we become overprotective, which would be natural in that environment, then this causes anxiety. This causes the children not to feel that they're safe, that the world is safe. Those children are my parents. And so that goes on in generations because if they've been raised to think that the world is not safe, this is something that they are passing down and they don't realize what they're doing. But you see that even from a completely behavioral point of view, it is getting passed down because it informs my worldview. And 5 generations down the line, we might not even realize what happened. And we have a family of 5 generations with severe anxiety.
Yes.
But something did happen. It starts somewhere.
You're not talking about the thing that started it, but you still have all of the effects of it. Exactly. I love that we're talking about this. I am so fascinated by epigenetics, and I think it makes so much sense. And like you said, behaviorally, I feel like it's just common sense. But even in the studies that are being done, changing the genes, changing the DNA, I think it's so fascinating. And it makes, again, so much sense when you look at generations of people and where they come from versus where they are now, what has happened over the generations. We know trauma affects the brain. We know that it literally changes our brain. So why wouldn't we think that it affects more of us, that it's literally going to change our DNA and change how we pass that on to, I feel like it's very evolutionary, right? We feel threatened. So, of course, we're going to evolve to kind of
protect ourselves.
Yeah, guard against that threat and protect our children and our children's children. And,
Exactly.
It's very obviously unconscious. We're not doing it. We don't know that we're doing it, but our bodies are protecting us.
Exactly.
I think it's so fascinating. So you obviously have moved around a lot. You've said that several times. Why did you guys move as a family so often?
At some point, my parents got into the Greek embassy.
Oh, wow.
And so they would leave every 3 years to go and represent our country in different countries, basically.
Okay. And so you've lived, I'm sorry, you're going to have to remind me. Yeah. I can only remember Saudi Arabia because I do really want to talk to you about that. But I know you mentioned multiple places.
Yes. So I lived in East Thrace, if I'm pronouncing that correctly in English. Basically, that is right across from Turkey. It's within the grounds, the continent where Greece is on. I can visualize it, but I can't really explain it very well. Forgive me. I'm not the most geographically savvy person. But basically, even though it is overall a Greek area and part of our northern country, that the specific place was taken over by the Turks for a long while. And in the particular village where we were at, it was considered a Turkish village.
Okay.
And so my parents' first post was there, and I was there first, second, and third grade.
Wow.
Yeah. And my sister was born in Athens, but she immediately, she was born right then. Then we came back to Greece for 4th and 5th grade. And then we went to Chicago, USA.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So that was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then I had the lovely experience of having high school in Saudi Arabia, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade.
Okay.
And then back here.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, you did mention that you would spend 3 years at a time. So it's not a quick time either. Like, you are settling in, you're going to school, you're making friends, hopefully. So how was the United States for you? What were your thoughts as a preteen going to the United States from a place like Greece?
The one thing that I recall more than anything is the fact that here in 4th and 5th grade, we have these things called a tutoring school that you go to after school to enhance a second language. Oh. So because it wasn't as strong of a point within the school, and even now, even though there is much more attention to having a second language in school and giving it much more depth, it's the norm here is that children will have to go to tutoring school after school in order to learn a second language. And so I was going to tutoring school 4th and 5th grade. I was a great student. I loved English. I felt like I knew so much English. And then I end up in Chicago and I am not understanding a word.
Oh, no.
Just like they were asking me, my classmates, for an eraser, and I didn't understand what they were saying. And I knew the word eraser, but it was the accent that I wasn't getting.
Yes.
I thought I spoke English, but once the first 2 years and you're learning it in a foreign country as a foreigner, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And so it took a while to get used to it, but I had a good experience. I was in a small school. It was the only Greek American school. And so there was half the curriculum was in Greek. And so I didn't feel as intimidated. The other half was in English. That was a bit difficult. Thankfully now looking at it, and I appreciated it back then at some point as well. But in the beginning, they weren't cutting me any slack and they were just failing me. And for me, that was like the end of the world, getting Fs. But my English grammar literature teacher wasn't even cutting me any slack on the calligraphy of all things. Like she wanted the handwriting to be perfect. And I was like, my God, like a little bit of lenience, cut me some slack. I'm trying to understand what you're saying, let alone write it in perfect cursive. But the fact that she didn't cut me any slack by mid-year in 6th grade, I had caught up with everything and I was doing extremely well. So in general, it was a nice experience. It was a small, tight-knit school there. I really liked it. We liked the US quite a bit. And that's why my parents at some point returned, because as I hit 18, I decided that I'm an adult now.
Yeah.
I get to stay.
Yeah.
I am not moving anymore.
Fair.
And then they had gotten a post in France and they rejected it. I was 17 and a half at that point. And I told them I wasn't going. And so instead of them leaving, they decided to reject it. But a year later, they get another offer to go to India. And I tell them, I'm not moving. So they actually did go to India. So from 18 and a half, I've been living alone. And they stayed there for only 2 years. I finished my bachelor's and then they decided to go to San Francisco. And that was so tempting. And of course I went to visit and I stayed for a month and I kept on visiting. The plan was that I would go there and do my master's. I got admitted in a university. I was going to do it. But then my now husband and I got together midway of that plan happening, of me finishing the last bit of my bachelor's. And so I never left.
Yeah. Fair. That happens. So you have not been back to the United States to live since you lived in Chicago?
To live? No, yes.
Okay.
I haven't been there, but I did visit them quite a few times.
Yeah.
It was nice when they were there. Now they're back.
I would. Now you don't have anywhere to go. The first time I heard you talk, I was very surprised because you really don't have much of an accent with your English. You sound very American with your English. So it's fascinating that you only spent 3 years there and you have such a American accent with your English. I think it's pretty interesting. My grandfather is from Hungary. He spent 50 years in America and never lost his Hungarian accent.
Really?
So yes.
Well, for me, I mean, I think 6th grade is pretty young to go.
Yeah.
I loved English. I realized that from the minute that my parents put me into learning English. And at the same time, I had started picking it up. I'm assuming I picked it up while I was in Chicago, but the fact that I then continued going into international schools because there was no choice of a Greek Arab school, for example, when I went to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I had to go to an international American school, basically. Then
That makes sense.
yeah, it helped because I kept on speaking English all the time.
Yeah.
At some point, I felt that I spoke English better than my mother tongue.
Okay. So. Wow. Yeah. And I mean, there is nothing wrong with having an accent. Please, I don't speak more than English. I dearly wish I did. And so many people that I speak to apologize to me for their English. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. My English is so bad. And I'm like, no, it's not. And first of all, like, you can't apologize to me when I can't say anything to you in your language. Like, that's just not even fair. So please, no apologies necessary.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
No. Okay. So you went from Chicago to Saudi Arabia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is very interesting to me for multiple reasons, obviously, but high school, you're a teenager, and this is, I'm assuming, a completely different culture for you. I mean, okay.
Yes and no,
Okay.
I guess. You know, I mean, going back, like my parents were speaking Arabic at home.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I never spoke Arabic, but they spoke Arabic. And like I said, there were things that they would do and foods that they would cook that were
that's right, yeah.
Arabic. And honestly, like even Greeks don't feel completely out of place if they're in the Middle East because our cultures in general mesh quite a bit.
Okay.
So the Italian, the Turkish, the Middle Eastern, we're very close, and there are close ties in our history. We've had encounters, some not so positive and some more so. And so there are a lot of things that are quite familiar. It wasn't a shock in that point, but mind you, I was very young. I was entering adolescence, and Saudi wasn't what it is now because the past few years it's been growing. So it changes, it shifts the perspective. So when I went there, I had to wear an abaya, which is that black thing that you have to wear to cover your body. It was before 9/11 occurred, but I was there when it did. And then after 9/11, there was a lot of heat for me to also cover my hair, not from my parents, but when we were out, there was, I don't know if you know of this concept, but there was something called the religious police. And so there would be this, do I call him a priest? So this religious officer, right, with 2 police officers protecting him because there were attacks on them, who was very intent on following you and making sure that you were abiding by the rule of wearing the abaya and covering your hair. Most women would wear the abaya. There were some that would even keep it open. So it was very funny and frustrating for me when they would tell the ones that had it open to just close it. And then for me that I was abiding by the rules, even though, like, you know, I'm not following your religion.
Yeah.
Right. And I wouldn't make you do something like that goes against your thing. If you were in Greece, I would still do it. And then they would ask me to cover my hair. Right. And so in general, I spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia where I had to be stuck to my parents. The one time that I went to the mall with my friends, it was at my 3rd year there. So that was 11th grade. And we were chased down by the religious police.
Oh my.
Yes, to be told to cover our hair, to cover better, and with the minimum would be to be kicked out of the mall. The maximum, if you went against them, it would be to get arrested. And so it wasn't a great experience. The first year I was there, I went to a couple of parties, which were stopped by the religious police. So it was like a 1 hour party or something. I don't remember. At some point I was like, I don't know why you keep on inviting me to these things. Like, I'm not going to get dressed and all hopeful. I don't think I went to any more parties after that.
It takes longer to get ready than to be at the party.
The nice thing is that the place is formed in such a way, the houses, where you live in compounds. Mm-hmm. And so within these compounds, there are walls around the houses that are included within each compound, and you're allowed to be the way that you want in there. You don't have to dress up to wear the abaya. And usually in a lot of these compounds, there were pools, and you could invite friends over. And that was mainly my pastime as a teenager. I can't say that I wasn't resentful for the fact that my Greek friends would get to do parties that didn't get stopped by the religious police. Right?
Fair.
And that had to cover up, and that, like, you know, how do you, like, I mean, I guess my classmates did, but I don't know how I never realized how that worked. How do you build romance in any shape or form? When the first year I was there, now that I say this, I was in an international school that was still boys and girls. And that was the last school that was left. And the year after, they separated us.
Oh,
and
wow.
So we were just girls and just boys. When they were forced to separate us, they didn't have enough buildings, and so at some point it was just like this half is just
like
boys,
a divider,
and like a divider, and we would look at the boys, our former classmates, from the window during break. Hi. It was a bit surreal.
Yeah.
It was restrictive. At that point, women couldn't drive. This is very new now that they can drive. Mm-hmm. Women couldn't work in sectors other than like 4 job professions. And I vividly recall that my mother, even though she always went places with my dad, and she never really enjoyed driving. And even when we were in Greece or wherever, she didn't take the car and go. But just the fact knowing that she can't do it, she felt very restricted, and it caused a lot of tension. So it wasn't the best 3 years. I did meet a lot of people that I keep in touch with, friends that I love.
That's wonderful.
There are a lot of things that I appreciate about the culture, about the way that we related to one another, the closeness, just like Greeks, they're very warm people.
Yeah.
But the restrictions within the country at the time, being an adolescent, I wasn't very enthused, to say the least.
Sure. I think it's actually great to hear you talk about this and make the distinction between the culture in the Middle East versus some of the religious restrictions that were, put into law. And it's not everywhere in the Middle East either, right? Because there are a lot of countries that are predominantly, one religion, and it's still not enforced by law that you have to, behave a certain way. So, and my experience in the Middle East is very limited. I've only been to a couple of places and for not very long, but I agree. I've found the hospitality just unmatched. Honestly, it is unmatched to anywhere else I've been. So I do think it's so interesting because we have perceptions, I think, especially in America, we have perceptions about what the Middle East is like. And we don't really know, first of all, because most of us have never been there. And even if we have, not for any significant amount of time. But it's important, like Middle Eastern culture is so old. Like it's not anything new, right? And like, so the religious restrictions are a more modern construct in some sense, right? And so that doesn't necessarily display the culture itself, and a culture that has been steeped and marinating for thousands of years again. So I do think it's wonderful to hear you talk about just the richness that you experienced there as well. So I am interested to know, though, because you were there on 9/11 and because you're not American, I'm interested to hear your perspective on kind of, did things change? What was that like, before and after kind of thing?
9/11 for me, I didn't know what had happened that day. And I go to school, and I'm in school, and people and some of my classmates, mind you, were like, 14? I don't know. They're very excited and they're talking about something. And they're, wow. And then a friend of mine who's sitting next to me, I'm like, what are they saying? What are they talking about? What's so exciting? And she explains what happened. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, are they happy about it? And apparently some of them really were. Because of course, like you're saying, the US has a one-sided view, and it's very easy. It's our brain's function. It keeps us safe to think that everything is one category. Going back to what you were saying about generational trauma, we understand evolution, but it's so much easier to think of genes as steady. This is it. That's what you got. It's easier. And it's easier not to have
a nuanced view of anything.
Yes, a nuanced view of anything. It's the responsibility of changing. And even though it doesn't keep you empowered, it takes your power away. We prefer that over having the responsibility of saying you could change something in your health, in your mental health, and whatever. In that same way, our brain wants to categorize things it doesn't know in order to feel safe. And so we see something. Plus, by the way, we need to be discerning, and most of us aren't, because we live in a quick world. This is not a judgment, but we live in a quick world and we watch the news very quickly. There are specific pictures that we are shown specific moments, and then we link these moments as the everyday life in a place.
Yes.
And we see certain people who do certain things. Like in the US and in any country, you're going to see the news, or you're going to see a robbery happened in that place in Philadelphia, blah, 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 blah. Are you going to say, oh my God, Philadelphia is full of robbers? No. But then when we see something abroad, because we haven't been there, and we see like, there was a terrorist in that club, I'm like, oh my God, all these people are terrorists.
Yes.
How do you make that connection? Our brain does that because you see it enough times. And I'm assuming, I'm not at all political, but I'm assuming there's a reason why we're being shown very specific things. Whenever they happen, it's just a chance to make sure we're shown these things. And our brain does this thing where you just connect it all together and you put it all together. But there were, in that same light, there are those people who, because the US hasn't treated the Middle East very well, have a very negative image of the US. And there were these kids that felt like it was well-deserved what happened. Not being American and not having anyone close to New York or the Twin Towers, I burst into tears. My teacher thought that I had someone in the Twin Towers the way I was so upset. I remember it now vividly. Like, she took me out of class. She helped me calm down. I was very upset by the fact that you could be 14 years old and you could be happy with the death of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is, unfortunately, again, there are a lot of things we inherit, right? I mean, because I don't believe anybody is born with any sort of maliciousness or hatred in them, and it's very much taught to us in the way we interact with people. And I agree, there's a lot of it that's a protective measure, that is subconsciously done. We don't realize we're doing it, but it's still our responsibility to be able to identify and say, hold on, I think these are still human beings. And again, on both sides, because I could say the same things for Americans that have the same types of thoughts and feelings about people they've never encountered, and from images and small snippets that they've been shown on the news or social media that really just reinforces these hateful and mean views that are not at all representative of humanity. It's very actually the antithesis of humanity, I would say. So, did you have Americans in your school because it was an international school?
In that particular classroom that I was in, no. It was mostly other Arabs, like people from Syria, from Lebanon, Palestine. And so they were immigrants. And in Palestine, they have, received a lot of the negative impact of the U.S. supporting, actively supporting Israel. And so I understand where that's coming from, because going back to what we were saying, they're carrying the trauma and the effects were potent for them. It wasn't just theoretical. It happened a few generations ago. A lot of people are in Saudi, for instance, in Lebanon, in Jordan. A lot of Palestinians are in Jordan, who are currently, they have family in Palestine that they can never see because they can't go and the others can't leave. And so I understand where their frustration is coming from and how it could turn into that. I didn't understand that when I was a 14-year-old girl, just looking at it from the outside, not as an American and not as a Middle Eastern, looking at it just like, how can we be celebrating death? Yeah. That was my concern. I was very, I wouldn't say appalled, but I got very emotional. And I was like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that could be.
It is. I mean, I do think it's an appropriate response because it really paints a picture of how, I guess, far removed from our own emotions and feelings, because I would say that there's no, I don't want to put too fine a point on it. And I also don't want to pretend to know somebody else's struggle or what somebody else has been through. But I do think that generally speaking, when we have a one-dimensional view of anyone or anything, that is rarely a good enough picture to make a final judgment, right?
Yes. Exactly. But we do make judgments. And again, that goes back, I think, instinctively to wanting to have the full picture. Our brains do that. And research shows that our brain will fill in the gap of a picture that's missing automatically. And then it will also do that with dreams. It will also do that with things that we are told and we're not given the full picture, but our brain will try to have a rationale behind what happened and it will fill in the blanks to that story.
Yeah.
And so we're given enough of a particular narrative and then we create our own to fill in the gaps. And that is so subconscious and we think we're very well informed, but we're not.
Yes.
And so we function from that point of view and it can be very detrimental.
The image that's coming to my mind as you say this is like those AI pictures that it's like, I don't know if you've seen them, but it's like you upload a picture and then you have AI zoom out and they are supposed to like the AI is supposed to fill in the surrounding. And it always looks something out of like a nightmare. Like it's never like a normal thing. Like it's somebody standing in a field and it zooms out and it's just like nightmare fuel. It's not just like the rest of the field or flowers or whatever. It's just like weird and not kind of nonsensical, but you can tell, obviously, there wasn't enough information for a complete picture to be drawn. And so that's kind of the image that's in my head of like, yeah, we don't know what we don't know. And if we pretend like we do know and we start coloring that picture with such certainty, I think that's what it is, right? Like we're all prone to bias. We're all prone to filling in the gaps. Our brains do it naturally, as you've said. But it's the certainty and the arrogance in that certainty, I think, that gets us into trouble.
I have to agree with that.
So your junior year was your last year in Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Have you lived anywhere else since you moved back to Athens when your senior year?
No.
Okay, so you've just visited places. Have you been back to Saudi Arabia?
No, unfortunately. But I did have friends visit here.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Do you hope to go back someday to visit?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, a part of me wants to go see all the different
Changes,
things.
yeah.
Honestly, I would want to visit different places in the Middle East. I feel like I've seen Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I'm keeping the good points. I'm keeping the friends, the connections, the hospitality, like you said, all these beautiful things. I'm the type of person that if I want to go, like, I mean, if I had a lot of friends still living there, because we've dispersed, I would definitely
Sure.
want to go more than I do now. Since I don't, I would love to visit different places. So I've
Yeah.
got a lot of clients in Dubai,
Okay.
living in Dubai. Some of them are from the UAE and some of them aren't, but I would love to visit the UAE to get a picture of like all these people that I'm working with
Yeah.
live here. I would want to know what it's like. So that would be one place. I would definitely want to go to Lebanon. I hear so many beautiful things about it. And my parents are from there and family still lives there. There is
Okay.
some family, like my mother's family eventually moved back. However, my father's family never did.
Oh, wow.
Some of the kids, because there were 5 of them, some of them moved back to Greece. Others also, like one of them also got into the embassy, so he was moving around. But one of my aunts and my grandpa and grandma, they stayed there their entire lives. They've passed now, but they stayed there and I never visited. So I didn't have the opportunity. That would be a place to go. In Syria, one of my closest friends is from Syria. I would love to see. But right now, I don't know that it's the best timing.
Yeah. I think, we don't have to always go back to places, right? Sometimes it's just that was the season of our lives and that's great. And then, you move on. And there are some places that will be with you to be going back again and again. And I do think there are some places that you just have a connection to. And I can't necessarily explain it, but I felt it. So, like I have certain places that I will always return, that I always want to be in. And it's not to say that I haven't had great experiences other places, but I don't necessarily need to go back to them. So, yeah, I mean, I think just like anything else, you visit, you have your memories, and then you move on. So that makes sense.
I have this thing from when I was little. I've noticed it in many areas. I have this obsession with moving forward. Not necessarily in the sense of like, as a psychologist, I do take people back a lot. But as a person, I do that with the mentality of moving you forward then without the shackles of the past. So we do have to go back. We do have to recognize. And I've done my share of going back and understanding what's happening and what I kept from there and my perceptions and which ones are helpful and which ones aren't. But I'm the type of person that even if I'm in the middle and is a bus station below the house, like further away, which at a point where I consider back in terms to my destination, and the other place is forward, I will go to the forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a little bit OCD, but I'm the type of person, I just want something new, which is a little bit weird because, for example, I'll watch a movie, I'll forget it the second that it finishes, but I don't want to watch it again. Whereas my husband will watch the movie, he'll remember everything, and he is willing to see it 20 times if he liked it. And so it makes no sense, the fact that I don't want to go back, since I am the type of person that forgets.
Yeah. Yeah.
low memory drive. So I just like delete things.
Yeah.
But I'm always for, okay, we've seen that. We've experienced that. So I don't remember the details, but I remember how it felt. I remember the experience. Let's go and experience something else.
Yes.
Having said that, I would go back to Malta. We had gone there only for like 3 or 4 days for a honeymoon with my husband. So this is not a place where I can say that I know the culture, right? The way that I did with the other places. However, I fell in love with the place. It was just, and it's so familiar, very Middle Eastern looking. And it just felt like, home in a sense. It felt very nice.
Yes.
I would definitely go back. That's the one place that I would revisit if I had the chance. But I haven't been traveling for years now. There are so many other places on my list to go. So that's how I kind of say, no, I wouldn't go back to Chicago. If I had the chance to go to America, I would visit New York. I've seen San Francisco. I would go to New York, or I would go to Los Angeles. I would go to Washington, D.C. I wouldn't go back to Chicago.
Yeah.
Not because I didn't love my experience there, but I've seen that. Let's do something else.
Yep. And no, I think it makes sense. And I think I have a few places where I am just like, it feels like a soul connection, honestly. Like I feel at peace there, and I haven't lived in these places, but I just feel like I could, right? But I don't feel like that with every place that I go. So I do think that there is something special, when you do recognize that, even if you're only there for a few days, because it's not everywhere, you don't feel like that everywhere you go. But I do think that there are some places that are just like your whole being feels at peace in these places, and I can't explain it. And I know it sounds very woo woo, but I don't know. I've just had that experience a couple of times. And so as much as I'm like, I want to see everything, but I also feel pulled to like return to certain places as well. So, I mean, what a problem to have, really. But so you haven't been traveling for a few years. Mm-hmm. Is that because of having your son?
Not necessarily. Of course, that makes it a bit more difficult. However, no, my husband isn't a traveler.
Okay.
And so he's a homebody in a good sense.
Yeah.
So we've been around here, and we get to visit Greek islands, which is also something that there's so many Greek islands to see and things to do, which now has been curbed because of our son. And so he's from a Greek island, which is amazing. Wow. He's from Zakynthos. And so we have the privilege and opportunity to be going there because he's got family there as well. And it's a beautiful place that has both green and it has beautiful sea, kind of like a pool, and it has the mountain. It's got everything. I do miss traveling, but at the same time, I do because I'm the type of person that will do all the things. And if you tell me an idea now, let's do that, I'll hop on and do it. And my husband is the exact opposite. And the past few years being with him, I think he brings calmness and more simplicity in my life that I really need. I've been resisting it for a year. We've been 17 years together. Wow. I can't say that I haven't been resistant to his form of life for a while, but I'm catching up 17 years later, and I am consciously simplifying. So I was simplifying through him. I was living a bit like, a more relaxed kind of life through him. But now I am really realizing that I have been wanting this all along on a personal level. And there's some things you have to say no to in order to say yes to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think, we can change, like, different seasons of our life are meant for different things, right? Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with living different seasons of life differently. So it doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change your identity. And I think, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the things that you do being who you are. And so you kind of like are afraid sometimes that if you don't keep doing those things, like people aren't going to view you the same way. Like it somehow detracts from the things that you've already accomplished or done because you've shifted and pivoted. And it's just not true. And we all do it. We all change. Yeah. We all have to.
Or that you're a hypocrite or that you've left something behind, but you're right. So the fact that I'm not traveling now doesn't mean that I won't travel later.
Yeah.
Right. And so now with my son being 5, it's a little bit more difficult to consider how would we do that. But I honestly, in my own therapy with my therapist, I have been working very hard to not have that white and black and that perception, which just comes so naturally to just think that at this stage and phase of my life, and specifically motherhood, this is going to be like that forever. And she's like, he's going to grow up and he, like, in a millisecond, you're going to be at a different phase where he's more so in school and in other activities and seeing friends. You're going to have much more free time because, for example, it's been difficult to also work on my career and my projects and all these things. I'm a very driven person. And it's been very difficult for me to reconcile this part of me that's so driven and has all these ideas and all these projects that I would dip my toes into everything, and I would also execute, and things would happen and all of that. Then I have my son and I'm kind of like, oh my, I have to actually pick.
Yeah.
So I was like a kid at a candy store before my son, and I could pick all the candy and I could try all the candy. And now I'm kind of like, you can pick the candy. It's not like life is over. It's a beautiful thing to have children, but you do have to be more mindful about what candy you're going to pick, and you're not going to have to pick as many. And I fought against that notion for a while. It felt like, well, I've heard that you can have it all. And I've always had it all. So why can I have it all with a child? That's just an extra role I take on, and I excel in all my roles. And so why not? And it wasn't like that. There is a very big shift that happens, and an identity shift that needs to occur if you're going to go with the flow, so that you can reconcile the old with the new. But at the same time, that's what's magical about motherhood, and research shows that it's even more profound than adolescence is, because in adolescence we form our identity, and it's a profound shift hormonally and physically and personality wise in our identity. Motherhood is actually even more profound of a change in that aspect, because it keeps on changing. So as children go through different stages of life, we keep changing with them, and we keep on having to adjust. And this puts you in a position where in our times, we want this stability, and we want to know, and the guarantee, and the things are going to be this way. And so this is exactly why we get to the point where, life is going to be like that from now on, or I don't travel anymore now. Is my identity now? Am I a hypocrite, or is something changed about me because I don't do it? But maybe you don't travel now, but maybe you'll travel again later.
Yeah.
And with kids, this thing happens all the time. You have to be in flow so that you can adjust to all the waves going up and down and changing. And a lot of us aren't in flow, which is what drove me to work with women and moms and their partners in the couple setting, because I experienced it firsthand, even though I am in the space of mental health, and even though I had been working with parents. And so at the very least, I thought, I know how hard it gets, and I know nobody's the perfect parent. And so I felt that at the very least, I would have low expectations of myself and of the whole experience, but I wasn't shielded from that. I still felt the shock. And that was also because as a person, I had a very set point of view of how things work. And then things didn't work that way anymore. And it took me such a long time to be able to say, okay, let's go with the flow.
Yeah.
And so that became my passion, to help women overcome this a little bit quicker than I did.
I love that. I mean, full disclosure, I'm not a mom, but I love a lot of them. So, I do think there's so much, I think there's always been a certain amount of pressure on women within motherhood, but nowadays it just seems like it's coming from every little corner. And so women who are already walking through this huge internal and external shift are now being hit from every side, telling them, first of all, contradictory things, right? Like
all the time.
Nobody has the same advice, but everybody's right. And so I think it is really difficult for women who become mothers to kind of find their identity, because everything has to change, right? But also not being so swept up in the change that they lose who they are intrinsically, or they lose themselves as a person either, right? And I would say, as somebody that doesn't have children, it's also something that just societally, you know, obviously the internal and external change isn't there, but societally, it's still something that's difficult for women. Just the idea of children or the idea of motherhood, because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Like, but women, whatever you choose, it's wrong. It's the wrong thing that you're doing. So yeah, I mean, I guess like I would love to hear your perspective on how women are supposed to move through their lives when they're constantly being told that what they're doing is wrong.
Wow, that's a loaded question. A really good one, but loaded. Yes, because you're right. If you choose not to have children, then there's something wrong with you. There's like, don't you have the biological clock ticking or something? So there's that. And then if you choose to have a child, like me, I choose to have one, then I don't know if that's the concept in the US, but here there's a phrase where it says 1 equals none.
Oh.
So 1 equals none. You should have 2. But then you have 2, you're struggling. What did you think? That's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
What did you expect so you're damned because you had children and you show a little bit of difficulty. You're a bad mother. Aren't you enjoying every bit of it? Then you have 3 children and you're flustered and overwhelmed sometimes. You had too many.
Yeah.
Right? So
It's your fault.
You can't get it right.
No.
So how do we get past this? I think the first step is to really recognize what is happening and to really feel it to our bones, not just logically to know that, oh my God, this is ridiculous, the way that we're treated and this whole thing that we keep on hearing. But a lot of times we say that to ourselves, but our emotion doesn't follow. And in that aspect is where I work with women to figure out why didn't it follow. Usually there's some internal reason, something from my past, from my childhood that is following along. So for me, for instance, I've always felt the need to perform in order to be worthy. And so I knew that what I was encountering was ridiculous, yet I couldn't get past the guilt and the shame, which are feelings I didn't feel before motherhood, to be very honest. I didn't, like the minute that I did something wrong, I would be able to say, ooh, oops, and then fix it somehow with an apology, with a way to fix it. I didn't stay in guilt and shame ever for too long enough to say that I'm a person that feels guilt and shame. But ever since motherhood, it's like a constant battle against the current. And at some point I had to just recognize that what's happening. And so mentally I knew that it's illogical, the things that are expected of us as women and as mothers. And I kept on fighting against it. And there was like this rage as well that you hear a lot of times, mummy rage. But my emotional thing wasn't following. So even though mentally I was saying this is irrational, so that should have been it. But emotionally, I was still in guilt and in shame that I'm not doing enough, that things aren't. And I had to work through that part of me that felt like you need to do in order to prove yourself. And in motherhood, what motherhood calls us, if we're willing, the calling is to be. And it's so tough in our society to just be, because a lot of us have grown up with the value of the things that you do and you produce and you can show to the world are the things that make you good at ABC. And so in that same way, motherhood has now become very, I don't know, we have to perform and we have to make sure that our children go to school and they have every day they have a different snack that is all healthy and, you know, that whole scrunchy thing and everything, which I love. Like we want to be healthy and we want to do the best for our children, but a lot of it puts a lot of pressure. And so I was speaking with a couple the other day. They have a very young baby and they're having a difficult time. And they were saying that we've read these things about children suffocating if you co-sleep, and we've seen all these things. We have friends who do it and they're fine. And we have our midwife that says, like, you know, your wife is at a point of breaking down because she's sleepless completely. And she is advising as a midwife, and the GP as well. And all these people are saying, co-sleep. There's these things that you can do to make sure that it's safe for the baby. Do it. But they're being reluctant to do it at the expense of the mother's physical, mental health, right? Psychological health. And I had to kind of bring it forward to them and show like, what are we, like the scale is tipping, and is the child safe if the mother at some point is carrying so many months of sleeplessness, right? So we need to have a little bit of a perspective, is what I'm saying. And when we have this perspective mentally, but emotionally it's not following, we do need to look within ourselves and start to work through what is it that doesn't allow us to take that, like it's still pushing through, and to start working a little bit through that potential tiny, like we have tiny and big traumas. When we talk about trauma, I think a lot of times people think, sexual abuse or
it has to be
physical
the worst.
abuse. Yeah, it's usually some kind of abuse that comes to mind when we think about childhood trauma, for instance. But it could be tiny traumas. It could be having an ambivalent mother, having a neglectful father, or an absent father that you don't think that it's necessarily trauma, but it is. Those are not necessarily tiny traumas either, by the way. And so we need to look back and understand what's standing in the way of me being okay with being there and doing my thing. What's getting in the way? And so I always talk a lot about, because I did it, and so I know from experience, overreading. I'm in the field. I've also worked with children because I'm also certified as a special educator. And so you would think that I wouldn't have to like buy all the books and read all the things, but I still read all the articles. I still bought books, and I was one of, like I described the couple, I was in their place. I know what they're talking about. I get that inclination to follow the medical article that you read. And then at some point I realized that I gained so much weight after, like this is postpartum. This is not because of the pregnancy. I lost the pregnancy weight and then I gained so much weight, and it was basically because of the sleeplessness, and the sleeplessness kept going on because I wouldn't allow certain other things to happen because I had to do things by the book.
Yeah.
I didn't allow that flexibility. And I think part of that also has to do with the fact that we grow up alone, in a sense, that there's no village. There's just that family, that strictly family unit, and we don't get to see a lot of people parenting in different ways, and it's not the norm. So that couple had friends that did things differently and it seemed fine. But because this is not something that they have experienced for a long time, this is just now they're becoming parents and they have parent friends and they see things, they're not comfortable with it. Whereas women in the past, they grew up around their sisters, their aunts having babies, their cousins having babies, and they saw different things and they saw that it's okay.
Yeah.
And they were much more flexible to do it. And when the feminist movement, and this is part of it, and that's why I'm mentioning it, it's important to know the history. When the feminist movement started and women demanded that they also are allowed to be in the workforce and that they don't have a ceiling, and that they get, just because they have babies and children doesn't mean that they have to be stuck at home if they don't want to, if they don't choose to be stay-at-home moms. When that started, that generation of moms wasn't all that concerned about what the snack will be, and if they will take them enough times to the playground, and if the kid will have enough activities to stimulate their brain. And I'm not saying that all of these things aren't progress, that we care about keeping a balance for our children now that we know better. But if we're going to go down that route, we need to release somewhere. So you can't do all of that and also do work and be perfect at work. That's the thing. Back then, it was kind of like, okay, I'm cooking when I come back from work and the children are playing in the other room, or let's say I have one child, and that's okay. But now moms are bad if they don't engage with their children and they don't play with them on the ground. And so how are you supposed to go to work, be fully devoted to work, dedicated, not thinking about your baby? Then you come back, so you work as though you're childless, and then you come back home and you're supposed to completely disengage and from work, right? You're not supposed to pick up the phone or do all the things, which, and unfortunately now is very difficult. But you're supposed to also have an impeccable home. You're supposed to have quality time with the baby, with the child. It's completely impossible to do all the things And when we look back and we say, oh yeah, but my mother had 3 kids and she was able to do it and she didn't complain. And yeah, but did she have all that pressure? Did she take you to this class and that class and the other class? Did she always make sure that you had the perfect lunch, or did she just allow for you to have pizza every once in a while? Did she, all these things that moms are told that they have to do now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is... Everything that you said was so beautifully said and so beautifully paints the picture of what we expect of women. And again, I think, first of all, there is a morality that has been attached to the way that women behave just in general. Mm-hmm. Everything they do, it's not like that's your opinion, that's my opinion. There are different ways of doing things. It's good and bad. And I think that is such a dangerous place to go. Now, of course, there's always extremes in everything, but most women are not performing at extremes. They're just trying to live their life the best that they can. And so when we constantly attach morality to what their actions are, how do we expect women to function as people, as individuals? And so, I think there's multiple factors at play, one of which is that a lot of women have to work. Like, it's not really a choice anymore. And for those who it is, like, it's a valid choice if they want to, and it's a valid choice if they don't want to and their family is able to afford it. But I think women have been put in a position that they have to qualify their decisions to such an extreme degree that it paralyzes them. And so we see just these women that are just so stressed all of the time. I mean, even as not a mother, I feel the constant need to qualify my experience, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. And I don't have that added motherhood and a child or more to add to it. And so I really feel for women in general. And I watch so many of my friends and family members who are mothers walking through, especially this stage of life with their young children, and just trying to exist as people. And I think that is what gets me more than anything. Mothers are people. Women are people. We're human beings, and constantly being looked at as failures. I mean, truly, if you don't meet this threshold, this standard, arbitrary standard, truly set by society and, men, you are now this complete failure. And how are women supposed to, first of all, be emotionally okay and mentally okay, physically okay? But then what do we expect for them to, what their children are seeing, right? Like, our children are growing up watching all of this unfold. And so we're creating, first of all, generational trauma. We'll just full circle right there. Yeah. But second of all, we're creating just a society in which we're constantly policing each other. For what?
And we're constantly neurotic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the thing that you're saying hits a spot, because there's that contradiction, and I felt it to the bone. And finally, I figured out the term matrescence, and I did a training on the identity shift that happens in motherhood. And part of it talks about the society and how the structures in society and the patriarchy don't help us in all of the ways that we can adjust to this change, because of the way that capitalistic society works, where you are supposed to perform and you are supposed to hit milestones. You keep on growing and doing all the things. But then what was very interesting for me, and it hit home, because that's one of the things that, along with the guilt and the shame, I kept on feeling like I contradicted myself all the time.
Yeah.
That feeling of I want to be with my child 24/7, and that feeling of wanting to flee at the same time. Yeah. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And then you realize, look, there are completely different sets in most bullet points under the perfect woman and under the perfect mother. A lot of times they very much contradict one another, because the perfect woman if she's not going to let her fellow women down, she's supposed to act like a man, and she's supposed to show men that she can do it just as well as they can. So she's supposed to conform to the patriarchy, basically,
Right.
and do all the things and not drop her career. So stay-at-home moms, you're being judged. There you go.
Yeah.
So the mother that decides that she wants to stay home, she's already failed as a woman, right? And not only to men, to women as well.
Sure.
To a lot of women.
Well, yeah, patriarchal system is going to uphold patriarchal values.
Exactly.
So, yeah, trying to operate in feminism under a patriarchal system is bound to fail.
Right. But if you decide to be the perfect woman while being a mother, you're going to be running crazy in order to do well in your career and to prove and to do all the things.
Yeah.
And then you come back home and suddenly, all of a sudden, you're supposed to switch off that masculine energy, that aggressively masculine energy, because masculine and feminine energy, they both have their positive and their healthy forms. But what happens when we are feminine creatures in a masculine world and we want to do all the masculine things, we turn off the feminine, we come into a more unhealthy masculine energy as well. And our feminine also becomes unhealthy. So you come in and you're expected to just turn off the masculine energy, and all of a sudden you are all flowers and flow and nice and no yelling and no running around, and take your time, and your child is having the tantrum. You're supposed to be calm and hug them and no rush. You have to cook, you have to clean, you have to prepare for work tomorrow. You have the phone ringing, and if you don't pick up, your boss will think you're no longer dedicated. And so there's going to be a ceiling for you, because before a woman ever hits the glass ceiling, she hits the motherhood one. And so, like, there's so many women that complain. There are studies on this that show that women, the minute they become mothers, they already hit this ceiling where it is assumed that she's not going to be as devoted.
Yes.
She's not going to want to go to the traveling trips because she's a mom. But what if she does want to go? Oh, we're going to judge her. She's a bad mom because she wants to leave her kids and travel for work? She can't win.
No, honestly, you can't. And I think it's very interesting, because interesting and not in a good way. But so something that I've noticed is mothers are simultaneously celebrated and demeaned at the same time, right? So like becoming a mother, people will tell you that it's the most beautiful thing, that, you know, you were born to do this. It's the best job you could ever have. All of the things that are just so like, there's almost a nobility in it, right? Like it raises you onto this pillar. But at the same time, it also says you are now incapable of being a human being in society. You are kind of othered in a way, like, you know, you're not really a functioning adult anymore because you're a mother now. Like, kind of sit in your place and do your thing with your kid. That's your job. Yeah, and that's who you are.
Exactly. You don't have interests. You can't talk about anything else other than the children. And so I've had a lot of friends, and I think in a way I've said it before myself, that like, you know, when I become a mom, if I start just talking about my child all the time, like slap me in the face so I snap out of it, because it's nice talking about our children, but that doesn't need to become our whole life. And you're right. Like there's this thing where you're just expected to only be enamored and fulfilled by the whole motherhood thing. And you're like, okay, so now you have to have mother friends. And on the one hand, you need that, because for me, when I gave birth, I didn't have that many friends who had children, at least not close by. And so I didn't have much support. I spent a lot of time alone at home with my baby, and that was quite lonely. And so it's important to have people around who are at a similar stage to you.
Sure.
But at some point, it's like you said, you're just expected to hang out with the moms that you met in school and all these things. And I want to talk to people about things that I'm interested in, about the projects that I'm thinking, and people who have similar interests, about business and marketing, and about new things in health and in psychology. And it's kind of like, yeah, I can't talk about mommy stuff all the time. And like you said, I guess that there is this expectation that that's what you're supposed to be talking about. You're put in the corner, like this is what you're doing and this is what the others are.
Yeah. And I don't think that there's anything bad about like creating spaces specifically for mothers to come together. I think it's actually incredibly important. But what I've noticed as somebody that does not have children is if I walk into a space that's predominantly made of mothers, there is nothing else that gets talked about. And so I do think that in some ways it's a very natural occurrence. Like I don't think it's meant to divide in any way. But I also think, and I also believe that because of the systems that are created and upheld, it's a very natural like path to walk down. You know, this is our identity. This is who we are. Even so, like being in like church or something, like everybody has, you have like men's ministry and then you have like moms groups and you have
okay, I didn't know that.
I mean, and it's not everywhere, but it's like the men's ministry is for all men at all times. And they may have like women's ministry, but there are specific sectors of it that are just for moms. And it doesn't exist within men's ministry like, oh, this is just for dads. We separate the dads from the non-dads. Like it doesn't exist, but where in women's ministry, it does. And so you get there's this separation. And again, it's not everywhere, but there's this separation of this place is just for moms. And as somebody that doesn't have kids, it doesn't offend me that those places exist. But what it makes me think is we are just furthering the divide for women to have an identity outside of their children, right? We're telling them, we're reinforcing the idea that this is who they are.
This is only who they are,
yes.
Right? Because you are a mother and your identity does change. It's
yes.
not just another role. Your identity does change as a mother and everything starts to revolve around motherhood, but everything isn't motherhood.
Yeah.
So just because everything starts to revolve around motherhood doesn't mean that it's all motherhood related. And you're right. I mean, I didn't know this, but as I'm thinking about it, the way that you're saying it is kind of like, yeah, you're going to only be defined by your motherhood role. So you can go to that ministry now. Whereas the fact that it doesn't exist for fathers is like, yeah, okay, you're a dad, but you're not just a dad. And even in our society still, even though dads are getting more involved, it's still expected that you're less dad and more man, right?
Right. Right.
Whereas for women, we're kind of put in that position and it doesn't help you reconcile that gap that's between the old self and that old identity with the new one. And it doesn't help you find your footing about who you are now, how you can be somewhere in the middle, which is beautiful. And this is what I'm creating right now, a mom's group myself, but with the goal of being able to grieve for the old self, being able to reconcile and see what pieces am I keeping? Where are these pieces? Like, where is it okay for me for them to come out? Because we are shamed when they do. Am I not fulfilled 100% by motherhood? Yeah. Should I not just be completely there? For me, I'm a multi-passionate and like a person. I like to do a lot of hobbies. I like to try a lot of things out. Apparently, you know, if you flip through Instagram and TikTok enough, you can diagnose yourself with ADHD, which I probably do have because that's what's definitely one of the common themes for adult ADHD. And I was like, I had this crazy expectation. I didn't realize it was very subconscious, but then it came to the surface after becoming a mom that in becoming a mom, I wouldn't need to be sewing and making jewelry and creating things out of cement or whatever. I felt like, okay, well, at the point where I was pregnant, I was making things, jewelry with beads and stuff like that. And my husband was like, that's going to have to go away for a little while. It's going to be, you know, dangerous for the baby. I'm like, of course it's going to go away. And in my head, I was like, I'm not going to want to do anything else anyway. Like, why would I have that around? I'm going to pick that up way later if I want to. And then by 3 months, I was already going stir crazy, and I created a mommy blog just to keep my sanity, because it doesn't go away. If you have that drive to do things and to try things out, and that brings you excitement, are you just supposed to now be okay with just doing the motherhood thing? And for me, felt for so long, I felt that shame that why isn't it enough for you? Other women seem to find it enough. And so there was something wrong with me. And not maybe, I've heard women tell me who are the other kind, who are fulfilled, and this is the one thing that they want to devote themselves to. They feel like they're not enough of a woman, of, like, I didn't want a career and I didn't want to do all these things. Like, am I just like uninteresting? Am I not worthy for this world that judges you on your performance and, places you in some kind of scale based on that? And they feel like they're being treated as less than. And so, like you said, going back to that, it's never enough. And it's really important for us to just be who we are, to recognize that all of these things are working against us. And when you keep on hearing and seeing the same message again and again, you're bound to take steps back and start to feel like this again. But it's really important every single time to kind of bring it forward, that this is the world that we live in. And what I'm doing is valuable and it's worthy and it's enough.
Yeah. I think it just goes back to what we were talking about before with, living in different places. People are not one-dimensional. Women are not one-dimensional. And it's like you're either a career woman or you're a mother, or you are somehow supposed to be a hybrid of the two. And it's like, those aren't the only options. Those aren't the only things that women enjoy or that women are. And so I agree wholeheartedly. Motherhood changes you, right? It has to. Of course it does. And that's great. That's a beautiful thing. But it also, unfortunately, a lot of times relegates you to this lane that others you in such a way that I feel like women feel almost like they have to put these walls up where, like, I have to stay in these moms groups because, I do think there's an appropriate place for them, because women do need support and they do need to be able to talk to each other about what they're going through in other people that are going through the same thing and walking through the same thing. But just like your child grows, your place in motherhood is going to grow too, right? Like your seasons of life are going to change as your child grows. Your child isn't going to need the same things from you all of the time, depending on where they are in life. And so I feel like it makes me so sad when women completely lose themselves, and not in a way that like they can't embrace their motherhood, but just in a way that it defines them to such a degree that they don't know what to do after they don't have their children anymore, for, so emotionally close to them. And so I think it's awful because we put women in this situation. We place them there. We say, you have to this, that, and the other. You have to be the career woman, or you have to be the dedicated mother. You can try to do both. You're going to get stoned if you try, but these are the only two options for you. And by the way, you do have to define yourself. We have to know what to expect from you. And men don't have that put on them. They just get to be people.
Yeah. I think there's that thing I was thinking as you were saying this, that, for example, there's also, before we become mothers, we come with our own personal baggage, and we also come with the standards of society that women have to somehow perform to be seen as worthy. And so then when motherhood comes along, we're supposed to pick a lane. And so I'm thinking of stay-at-home moms, for instance, and a lot of them will wear it as a badge of honor. And so there's this awesome book that was talking about that history that I was saying before about feminism and what it was all about. And it also talks about how the media played into creating mommy wars. So war between mothers. Who's the better mother? The one that chose her career, or the one that chose to be a stay-at-home mom? And how the media, led by the patriarchy, perpetuated this a lot. and how when you choose to define yourself, let's say, as a stay-at-home mom, a lot of times, especially if I'm feeling insecure as a person, and that could be for a million reasons that I could be feeling insecure. Part of it is definitely societal. I am going to wear it as a badge of honor. I chose to stay with my kids. I chose to raise a better generation. I am doing this, which is true. But, you know, the other woman is not less than because she chose the career, and the vice versa. Because the other woman is led to believe that I chose to empower women, and I'm not going to be stuck in the kitchen and just tending to the kids. I'm going to show men in society I'm helping women rise because I am not, you know, abiding by what society says that women and mothers should do. And so it can become quite toxic, honestly, when we get ourselves into these positions. A lot of times this is because there's low self-confidence, there's insecurity, low self-esteem, that I need to attach myself to a certain identity. And what happens a lot of times when we do that is that we find ourselves stuck. And then we get back to what we were saying about hypocrisy and not allowing ourselves to change. Because if I've decided to be a stay-at-home mom and I've worn it as a badge of honor, and I'm walking around telling people how awesome I am because I'm a stay-at-home mom, maybe I'm not telling you that you're not because you're a career woman, maybe. Sometimes people do very openly, but just the fact that I'm walking around saying that, then my children go to school and my identity is like, okay. And let alone like when they get into adolescence and when they graduate, who am I now? And so now I have to redefine myself, but am I allowed? Because I was very loud about my purpose being that and only that. And the opposite is also true. If I've dedicated myself to my career, at some point I burn out. Or how many women find out that they decided that when they had children, they either had to work or they would choose to work. And talking especially about the ones that choose, let's say, maybe they have financial background that allows them to be stay-at-home moms at least for a while, but then they realize, I chose to work, but I really feel very uncomfortable being at work. Now it's like, but I identified myself as
I can't change.
Exactly. And so they find themselves stuck, and that further disallows us from going with the flow and being able to say, okay, I said I was going to go back to work. I don't feel comfortable with it now. If I stay at home, it's fine. And it's not going to be forever. I could change my mind again 2 years down the line. When my baby is more grown up and I can put them in childcare and not feel bad about it, or I can have more support or whatever that is.
Absolutely. No, I agree wholeheartedly. And change is such a important part of being a human being, but we struggle with it so much for various reasons. But I agree, we are so afraid to be viewed as
inconsistent,
or flighty, or, you know, God forbid. Like, make the decision that works for you in this season of your life, because your life is not going to stay the same. So don't force yourself down a path just because it's what you said you wanted at one point in time before you ever experienced it for yourself.
Exactly.
This has been fabulous. I have loved talking to you. So what is your business model now? Like, how can people find you? Like, can people find you? Are you open to clients kind of thing? Or what does that look like for you?
People can find me at markellacaplani.com. I work with moms and dads on the identity shift that happens, because just as there is matrescence, there is also putrescence. And despite the fact that this is a patriarchal world, the dad space is also underrepresented. So the men who are more inclined to be more inclined toward their fatherhood identity, and they start to feel the change, they are not really allowed to feel those feelings and those emotions, and to go there, they're not men enough. And so there is such a thing as putrescence. And so I work with moms mainly and dads. And then I work with couples who become parents and they see their relationship changing. So my work centers around relationship to the self as I change in parenthood, relationship to my partner as we both change in parenthood. And so a lot of times what happens is we change and we completely diverge. And you see that 90% of couples in that first year feel unsatisfied in their marriage, and you get 67% saying that they are completely unhappy. It's a natural process because it's a huge change that happens, but because we don't recognize the aspect of that it's normal for me to change and for you to change, and we don't make sure to check in, and we just go into trying to manage this chaos, and we not acknowledging that it's normal for us to be changing, becoming resentful to each other for changing, then what I do is that I work with couples and we start to normalize this, and we start to rediscover the ways we were connected, redefine ways that we can be connected as we change, and to make that okay and not be, you don't love me anymore because you're different. And the same with ourselves. So if we start to become more in tune with the fact that I'm changing and that's okay, and it's not something, there's not something wrong with me, I'm not inconsistent or flaky or whatever, then I can show up for my partner as well with that confidence that yes, I am changing, and here is who I'm becoming. Who are you becoming?
Yeah.
So I help mothers and fathers understand the change they're going through, and then if the couple is affected, I help the couple come together and discuss this and find ways to connect. And in essence, for me, that also helps the children. So I'm very passionate about children and helping children. I've worked with them in the counseling setting and in the educational setting. And when I decided that I want to combine all these things somehow to be working with parents and adults as well as with children, this is what made sense to me. Because if you can help the parents and if you can help the couple, you're in essence creating a much better place for children and for the next generation.
Yeah.
So yes, you can find me at markellacaplani.com, where I have a lot of information, or at Instagram at markella.caplani.
Great. We will link to this all in the show notes, but I love what you're doing. I think it's such an incredible line of work, incredibly necessary. And, you know, it can only be beneficial, right? To really explore that space, and not just individually, although that's important, but as a couple. You know, again, I don't personally have that experience, but as an outsider that's watched so many of my friends and family walk through it, I see it happening. I see the distance between couples. I see relationships change, and it's sad, you know, to watch as an outsider. And you hope that they, you know, come back to each other and they're able to mend whatever they feel is broken. And then also individually, you know, seeing people feel lost within parenthood, specifically motherhood. That's just who I have more experience with as women. But I just think there's such value in really sitting down and saying, like, you are going to change and that's okay. And let's talk about what change looks like, and how not only is it okay, it's necessary, and it's going to happen over and over again. And the sooner that you come to terms with that, the better your life is going to be. So exactly. Thank you so much for coming and for sitting down with me. I've loved our conversation. I feel like I could keep talking to you. So
thank you for inviting me. It was lovely being here with you. This conversation has been very enriching for me as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.